Okay, and here we are. Welcome to a freelancer's guide to taking a good brief. The reason that we are all here together is largely because we've all got a couple of really shit briefs in our time. I've seen some bad ones, and I'm fairly sure that you have seen this meme, one of my all-time absolute faves. Get up, client wants more changes. Please let me die. I feel like this quite often when I get to version 5 and have to go back in and make changes 5 months after having submitted the work, when I can no longer remember the client or the job. So, you know, that guy with a large and potentially fatal wound in his head is very often me. And this is representative of a truth. And the truth is the following, that clients often don't know what they want. So they do things like this. If you're a designer, you will have heard, maybe make it pink. Thereafter, they will say, no, a less pink. What I actually want is a more orange pink, and you will supply a more orange pink, and they will say, yes, like coral, but not coral, and then they will go back to pink. Now, I discovered on Clients from Hell, which is a Tumblr, my very, very favorite Tumblr ever, a website, the following quote from the archives, which I'm going to leave there for you to read to yourselves. This is a visionary client who wants the freelancer to know their vision with no help. So I'm going to just be quiet for a few minutes so that you can read what is on the screen. So I have a feeling that you are probably like me when you see stuff like that from a client via email. When you hear it over the phone, there's only one thing you think, and that is, for fuck's sake, right? And so I would like to explain to you the two things that I don't like about being a creative. There are only two. I mean, I love, as many of you know, I love freelancing, and I love being a freelance writer and trainer, but there are two things I don't like. The one is making changes to submitted work, and the other is unhappy clients, okay? Unfortunately, these two things are very often related to each other, but fortunately, they share a solution. And the solution to these two problems is taking better briefs, right? And so what I'm going to cover with you for the next 45 minutes or so is how to take a rock solid brief. Now, why am I so obsessed with briefing? Because when I take a rock solid brief, the success of my output is not dependent on the client. Some clients are inexperienced when it comes to using creative. Some have never used a creative before. And so they can't give a brief because they don't know how to, which is not their fault, right? They don't know what they don't know. But some clients are experienced, and the problem with them is they have absolutely no idea what they want. So they couldn't give a good brief even if they did know how to give one, because they don't know what they want. Now, I'm much more comfortable when my success depends on me. In other words, when the success of the job and therefore my own success depends on the quality of the brief that I extrapolate from the client, which the reason I've given you a rock in this image is because very often it is like extrapolating blood from a stone. And I take that on in order for me to be successful. I take it on, I bear the burden of that. I do all the heavy lifting for the client so that I can ultimately produce better work. And so what I'm going to do with you is I'm going to share the most important questions that I think you should be asking your clients as creatives. But the most important thing is ask questions. And I'm going to give you those questions split into 3 categories. The thing to bear in mind before we start is that I am a writer. Okay. And because I'm a writer, my questions to clients have got 2 objectives. Number 1, I need to get the factual and background information as well as the context. And number 2, I need to identify the client's desired or appropriate style and tone, right? That as a writer, this is John Steinbeck in the picture. I by no means claim to be as good as John Steinbeck, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, but I will say that we had a common set of objectives. Get factual and background information, and then identify the appropriate style and tone. Now, you may not be a writer. In fact, I know some of you on this call are not writers. Some of you are designers, some of you are translators. I know that we have editors, we have actors, we have all sorts of interesting people with us. And so whatever your niche, you are going to want to cover 3 categories of question. And I've split these into the basics, the specifics, and the context. So let's first look at the 6 questions that you should be asking a client in the basic stage of generating the brief from them. And the first one is, hello client, what business or sector are you in? This is usually a question that I ask so early on in the process that I haven't even started the work yet. This is normally my sort of first introduction to the client. I ask this one very, very early. Why? Because if I've worked in that industry or sector before, I may have some background knowledge, or I may know what questions to ask moving forward when I get to the specifics. But also, this gives you a sense of whether or not you want to do the work. Because if they are in tobacco, for example, you may not want to work for them. If they are in child pageantry, which is one of my least favorite things, then I wouldn't work for them. If they are in multi-level marketing, so if you ask this question up front, you can often eliminate some of the awkwardness down the line. Question number 2, what are your company's products or services? This is obvious, right? But we should ask it early because, again, we may have experience writing or photographing or drawing or illustrating or translating this sort of thing before. And so we may have some context that we can bring to the table or some value that we can add. Who are your customers in general? So not specific to this particular project that you want me to work on creatively, but in general, who do you serve? Who are the people that you, client, serve? And then, who is the target market for this particular piece of work? So whatever this piece of work might be, who is the target market for this particular project? Are they a segment or subsection of your greater, more general audience? Are they the whole thing? What are we looking at here? And this number 4, you should try and get as specific answers from the audience as possible. Then, who are your main competitors? As a writer, this is incredibly important because it helps me to sort of gauge where they sit, what sort of language we might need to use, what sort of key phrases we need for search engine optimization. If you're a designer, you would very much want to go through and look at the visual and corporate identity of their competitors to see what's being done in the industry, what's not being done in the industry. For photographers, again, this would help to give you a lot of really useful background and reference material. So no matter what you do, the competitor question is a big one. And then what can you lay claim to, Mr. Client, that your competitors can't? What is your USP, your unique selling proposition? So what is the thing that makes you special? Now, they are going to tell you a whole lot of shit when you ask this question. They're going to say, our service differentiates us, our quality, we are excellent, our people, transparent, whatever it is, they all say the same shit. Try and go deeper than that surface level of answers they're going to give you to really find something on the micro level that is unique about this entity, because they will give you the same shit that is in their vision and mission and values, and there's really nothing good in there. So here is the whole slide with all 6 of the basics on it. If you want to take a quick screenshot of that slide, you can feel free. But there it is. What business or sector are you in? What are the company's products or services? Who are your customers in general? Who is the target market for this particular project? Who are your main competitors? And then what can you lay claim to that they can't? So those are the first 6 questions. Then we move on to the specifics. And here there are 9 questions, 9 actual questions that you should be asking the client. And I'm going to go through them one at a time. The first one, what is the main message that you want this piece of work to convey? So whether it is a written piece of work, an editorial piece of work, photography, design, illustration, translation, whatever it might be, what is the main message that you would like this piece of work to convey? I'm just going to
cold will not disappear forever. What will happen is that the cold market will just get up.
We have a noisy lurker. I'm going to find you, noisy lurker, and I'm going to silence you. But I can't find you, so I'm just going to hope for the best. Right. So let's just go back a step. The main message that you want to convey, then the overall tone of voice or visual idea of the brand. In other words, what is the current status quo with the brand? What does it currently look and sound like? I often ask if there is already a style guide in place that I can look at. Very, very seldom is there actually a style guide or any sort of brand voice guide. There may be a visual set of corporate identity guidelines that you can ask for. It's a good idea to get that. Then, is there a particular style that you like or don't like? Clients will often say, this is what we like. Well, you know, our competitor has done this and we like it very much. It's a good idea to ask what they don't like. In other words, what shit looks like to them, because you don't want to be going down that rabbit hole by accident. This is something I only started asking recently, and it really cuts out a lot of drama later. What are the actual project deliverables? Now, this is so important. Please, if you are making notes, put a big NB next to this one. What are the different items of the project that you are wanting me to quote on, or that you are wanting me to do? Because sometimes they don't know. So you're going to need to work this out together. Are you talking about a multifaceted project that has lots of moving parts? Are you going to have to do any project management? Are you going to have to outsource certain bits and pieces to other service providers? What are the actual pieces of content or creative work that is going to be delivered back to the client at the end of the project? This is where you start scoping. Then what examples can you provide as guidance, either positive or negative? So this is their own stuff. So it's not just what they like or don't like, it's what they've done before that has either worked or not worked. What background material is available? This often they just do a massive data dump to WeTransfer or Dropbox, and then you can download the stuff from there. And this, for me, takes longer to get through than the actual work. So at this point, I know how much time to factor in for the project, because if it's 400 different documents that I have to go through in order to extrapolate facts, that's going to take me a hell of a lot longer than actually writing the 40-page website. So this is a really key question. This one's important as well. What mandatory inclusions are there, if any? So to give you an example, I do a lot of writing for radio. Sometimes I have to include things at the end that say SMSs are charged at $1.50, or T's and C's apply, or XYZ is a registered, financial services and credit provider. So if that needs to go in, that means that I'm limited in terms of how many words I can fit into a 30-second script. So I really need to know the stuff up front. This is also where you ask for versions of logos. If you're in design, you might ask for slogans, taglines, that sort of thing. What mandatory inclusions are there, if any? What is the specific problem or challenge my work needs to solve? So this is a slightly nuanced question. It's for them to think about what will happen at the end of having the work that is not happening now. And then how will you know whether the project has succeeded? So again, this is a new one for me. It wasn't one that I always asked. It's one that I've included more recently, and that gets some very, very nice insights. But often they will say something random like, the job will be of high quality. That's not what you're asking. What you're asking is, how will you know, Mr. Client, that what I've supplied is working for you? What metrics are in place for you to measure the success or failure of this piece of content? Sometimes they don't have one, and that's okay as well, but it's good to know that going in. So again, here is the full slide. I can't find the mute all button. Okay, so here is the slide. If you want to screen grab that, now is the time to jump in and screen grab all of the specific questions which are listed there for you. And then we will move into the third category of questions, which relate to context. There are 6 questions in this section, which I'm going to go through with you now, one by one. Are there any social or environmental initiatives that could be or need to be or must be or should be tied to the project? In other words, is there any CSI or CSR context to consider? Is this part of some of my clients, just to give you an example, have to align with the UN development goals? So I recently did a project with a client where we had to tie in very, very closely with goal number 3, which was healthcare and well-being. Another one of my clients is in the education sector, so we actually have to align with CAPS standards. So it's always a good idea to find out what the social, environmental, and or other initiatives are that you can tie to it. Would you want this project to be timeless? In other words, do you want it to have legs into the future, or is it intended to focus on current events or ideas? So for example, this might be a brochure that they're going to use for 5 or 6 years, or it might be a leaflet that they'll use once for a campaign and then never use again. Big one. Are there any industry misconceptions or contentions that you'd like to address? So just to give you an example, I recently worked for a gentleman in Cape Town who has had quite a lot of both negative and positive press over the years. He is a very controversial figure. And so when creating copy for his new venture, we did have to anticipate that there would be some pushback off the back of possible industry misconceptions about him. And it was really good for me to know that going in, because it tailored the tone that I used, and it affected a lot of the content that I chose to include. Where do you plan on publishing, sharing, or featuring the project? So this is important for two reasons. One, because the parameters of what you can produce will be based on where it's going to be featured. So if you're creating, for example, a billboard, you would need to know the size, the specs, etc. If you're writing a piece of copy that's going to go, a piece of thought leadership content, for example, then we would want to know, is it going to media? Is it going to only an internal audience? Is it being used in a newsletter? Where's it going? What is the word count? What are the publications rules? And then also another reason that this is a quite an important question is you want to know where this is going. Because if this piece of writing is being syndicated globally, for example, or if you're creating a logo that's going to be used by 10 companies, that's going to strongly affect your pricing. If the client wants to own the IP inherent in a project that you are doing on a freelance basis, then you would need to license the IP to the client. So this is really going to strongly affect what you charge. Who are you not targeting with this specific project? In other words, are there any audiences that you don't want to be speaking to? Now, if they battle to answer the who are you targeting question, which was one of the very early ones, then it might be a good idea to come to this one and say, okay, you don't necessarily know exactly your target audience is, but who isn't your target audience? And then you can help them to winnow it down from that point. And then, is this a once-off project? Or should it tie into past and possibly future projects? So this is also about longevity. Are we doing this once? Or are you going to want me to come back seasonally to update this? Are you going to want me to come back every month? Are we looking at a retainer arrangement? Are you wanting to, are you wanting me to chase up in 3 months to see if you need me again? What is the scope? Is it big or is it small? Again, this will affect what you charge, because you may want to give discounts for big volume work. So here is the full slide of the last 6 context-related questions. Would anyone, if you'll just indicate in the chat for me with a Y for yes, would anyone like me to go back and just show you all 3 of the full questions again? So you can just say Y or N in the chat for me to indicate yes, you would like to see them, or N, you don't need to see them. And I will, of course, as always, go with the majority. Oh, I think it's pretty much even on yes and no. Oh, goodness, no, it's mostly no's. Okay, so I'm hoping you guys got everything you needed there. That's fantastic. What I can also do is, let me just think how I can make these available. I can pop the 3 slides onto my website if you like as a download. So let me quickly just type my website URL into the chat. And in a day or two, you can go there. There's a freebies section, and you can download the 3 slides from the freebies section as PDFs. Okie dokie. Now, what if the client doesn't want to answer all of these questions? What if you're all ready to take the brief, you're all ready to ask the questions, and the client freaks out? They're like, oh my God, no, we don't want to answer all these questions. So yes, you want to be flexible. Okay, so you can cut down the list of questions, or you can just ask the basics, which was the first 6. But if they are not prepared to engage with you on giving you a proper brief, you also need to be prepared to run like hell, because a client who's not willing to invest the time in giving you the info you need to do a quality job, or at least produce an accurate quote, is a client that is going to be a nightmare to work with. So this is how flexible I would be. I have a base list of questions, very similar to the 6 basic questions that I provided, that everyone has to answer. And they usually have to answer them very early on in the relationship. So at like, hello, how are you stage? Like, hello, I'm whoever, can you do some work for me? Yes, I absolutely can. Here's my rate card, here's my bio. Please have a look at these questions, which will help me to put together a project quote. If they're not willing to answer the questions, there's very little chance that I will go further. So I won't have a meeting, I won't take another call. Like, you either answer the questions or give me a lot of information, or we are not a fit. But if we then go further down the road and they've answered the first 6 questions, and we get to the next set of questions, and the client is antsy about answering so many questions, or simply we don't have time given the deadlines, Then I'll pare down the questions into a much shorter title list based on the specifics of the job. The more work I've done in a particular sector or industry, the fewer questions I need to ask, because I'm sometimes familiar with, for example, mining or IP law or radio or whatever. And so that's why the upfront questions are, what industry are you in? So you can work with them to pare down the list, and you can be flexible, but don't let them get away with not answering anything, because then you're going to have scope creep for miles, and you're going to hate them, you're going to hate yourself. So how does the briefing happen? Well, as you all know, the world has changed. It is no longer a nice, comfortable normal. It now looks a little bit more like this. The world that we currently live in is a flipping roller coaster. And so the ways in which we engage with clients and take briefs and meet people and establish rapport and all of that is different. So in the old days, we would sit with a client over a coffee and take the brief face to face. So I used to take briefs at the client's office, usually in person, in their boardroom, drinking their dreadful coffee, and very often schlepping for hours to wherever their office was, and then schlepping back. It was hell. I hated every minute of it, but that's what we had to do for work. Today, we have two options, by and large. So I no longer see clients face to face. That's just a policy decision that I've taken. There are one or two of my long-term regulars that have been with me for like 10 or 12 years that I will meet for coffee or go to the office or have them here. But those are few and far between. It may be 3 in total that I will see face to face. The rest, my standard answer is I no longer see clients in person. If they insist, I charge double, which I consider danger pay. And at that point, they usually say, no, don't worry, we can meet on Zoom. So we have 2 ways of taking a brief in the new world. The one is we email them a long list of questions. Now, some clients actually prefer this because they can go through them slowly. It gives them time to think. They can put stuff in their own words. They can outsource bits of it to other people. So some of them really do prefer doing it this way, but some like to talk it through. So in other words, they like to have a virtual meeting with me or with you and have you actually ask them the questions live and then take notes. So I'm prepared to do either one of these, depending on what the client prefers, and I offer them a choice based on how comfortable they are. Some people don't think well off the cuff, so they prefer to do it in writing. Some people don't want to write anything ever, so they prefer to do it in a virtual call. And some clients will just leave me voice notes, which is totally fine. In the old world, I didn't engage with my clients via WhatsApp ever, but now it's very much, WhatsApp voice notes are very much a part of taking briefs and doing that. Woo, now my email has woken up. Sorry about that. Right. If you are emailing the questions to the client, so if the client has said, please email me your questions, please give the client guidance on how to complete the questions. So here's just an example of how I might phrase that. Please answer the questions in as much detail as you can. There's no need to stress about creating perfect prose or crafting magnificent sentences. I just need your wisdom and insights. Bullet points are fine. So this is just one of the ways that I explain how they can answer the questions. If you're on a call with the client, when booking the call, tell them upfront how long you think the call will take and how much of their time you need. And then two things that I do always when I do a phone interview or a virtual call is I tell them when we're halfway and I tell them when we're 1 or 2 questions from the end. It really just helps to set them at ease. They don't like to feel like the interview is going to be open-ended and take 100 years. So tell them how long you think it'll take up front. Tell them when you're halfway through your questions and tell them when you've got 1 or 2 questions left. It just sort of helps to manage expectations. And then there's less of this. There's less like, so many revisions or scope creep or nightmare vibes, whatever the case might be. There's just less of this when you ask a lot of questions. Here's another beauty from the Clients from Hell archives. I'm going to read it to you. Client, when you bite into a really good apple and you get that great crunch sound and the juices flow strong and sweet, and for a split second, the world is perfect. It's the best and it makes you want more. That is the feeling I want people to get from the ads. This does not mean I want a picture of an apple. What the hell kind of a brief is that? Like, I can't. I don't know that this is a client I could work with. But, remains to be seen. We'd have to see how many of my many, many questions they'd be willing to get through. Remember also that when you confront the client with a brief, either that you're going to go through virtually or in the form of an email or in a table, some are going to be intimidated by that, but some are going to feel really well served and well serviced. And those are very likely to be your people. So if the client responds negatively to the fact that you want to take a brief, red freaking flags, China, run. And there are a couple of things that I know for sure. And that is that the two things that I don't like about freelancing, which are making changes to submitted work and unhappy clients, happen very infrequently when I do all the heavy lifting and when I take on the responsibility for getting a brief out of them using the basics, 6 questions, the context, the specifics, 9 questions, and the context, 6 questions. And when I do all of that heavy lifting, everyone is happier. And I'm able to do work that makes me proud and that makes the client happy, and I make more money, and it's really just a win-win for everyone. So that was incredibly quick, 37 minutes. I'm Tiffany Markman. That was Taking Better Briefs. This is how you can connect with me. And of course, now I can thank you and open the floor for questions. So here we are. You can unmute yourselves. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to show you my face, which is over there. And I can now see all of you. So please feel free to ask any questions that you may have, either with your voices or in the chat. Nikki has a question. Go for it, Nick. You are muted currently.
Thanks, Tiff.
Yeah.
I'm finding that the kind of clients I'm getting nowadays sort of almost want you to collaborate with them on establishing the brief. They come to me and they say, you know, this is what we want to do. We're not 100% certain how we're going to do it. What do you suggest? And almost part of the job is answering the questions that you have set out. Now, I suppose my question is, do you charge for that? Because I don't.
I would, and I'll tell you why. Because the minute you become the person who is brainstorming or workshopping the brief alongside the client, then your role has moved away from being writer or designer or illustrator or developer or whatever, and you're now doing strategic consulting. And that is A, harder, B, something that has taken you years to be good at, and C, very time consuming. So yes, I would absolutely build in a very small percentage window to what you imagine the scope of the job will be for that sort of scoping. And also you're going to need to do it in order to quote. So yeah, I would totally charge for that.
Okay. What I have done when it has become part of the job on an ongoing basis is we make that a consultation time. So I charge per hour, but I charge for the consultation that goes with it.
Yeah, and your consultation fee can be slightly higher per hour than your service fee. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Because remember that this kind of strategic consulting is the product of many years of experience and expertise on your part. You wouldn't be able to do it if you're very junior. So consulting fees should always be slightly higher per hour. So just to give you an idea, my copywriting rate, so for sort of agency work, is 1295 ex VAT, I think, 1290 ex VAT. My consulting rate is 1995.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Great. Thanks.
Cool. More questions, Asablef?
I have a question. It's Monique. Firstly, thank you for a wonderful presentation. Just out of the blue today, I got a request from someone. They're launching a Africa-wide platform, and asked me if I would be willing to do the media releases around it, and I said yes. And I just said, let's have a conversation. And they basically sent me an email with 100 attachments and said, no, we don't want to talk, just go ahead and do this. And it's such a bizarre thing, but I kind of know that if I complicate their lives, they'll be a bit irritated with it. And what do you do in that kind of situation?
So it's a really, really good question, because I'm a believer in making the client's life as easy as possible, right? But I'm also a believer in we need to work together a little bit in the early stages to give me the information that I need in order to do a quality job. So I would do it, but I would charge a shit load of money for what I call material review, info gathering, and brief and scope development. because if they don't want to brief you, that's fine. You can write your own brief, absolutely. But that kind of ability on your part costs money on their part. Like, it's not something that is free. So go for it. But, you know, I always say you can't have fast, good, and cheap. You've got to give up.
Absolutely.
And it's the same thing with this. You can't have like enormous low input on the client side and cheap. You can sort of pick two.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I've got 2 questions in the chat, which I'm going to answer. Robin Javert, my clients are all internal. I work with different teams within the company that I work for as the marketing manager. Our challenge is deciding when to invite everyone for brainstorming and when to leave them to their own brainstorming, and only getting involved when we are ready to write the brief. Robin, I would say that it depends very much on the personalities and the value that you get from an enormously big group brainstorm as opposed to letting them do it on their own. So I would treat it very much on a case-by-case basis, if that's possible. I mean, I'm hoping you don't have to have like a standard protocol for that. And if you don't, then what I would do is base it on what you typically get out of those people from a value point of view. And depending on the kind of job and the kind of project, either get everyone in or let them do it on their own. I wouldn't have a rule. I wouldn't want to have a rule for that. I'd want to sort of make the decision on the fly based on the people and the requirement. I hope that answers your question, but if it doesn't, please ask more questions. It does. Okay, good. Lisa, if the client doesn't make their deadline, but expects you to make the initial deadline. Yeah, Lisa, story of my life. And my husband always says to me, why do you let the client sail through their deadline and then pull rabbits out of hats overnight to meet the deadline? And I'm shit at this. Like, you'd think after 16 years, I'd know how to do this better, but I'm just bad at it. And I've got a colleague, Terry, who has taught me. My husband's going to be so pissed off because he's been saying this for like 14 years. And then Terry and I have been working together for 3, and I listen to her, but that's just marriage. Terry has taught me that if the client sails through their deadline, your deadline has now ceased to exist. Like, then everything is up for grabs, and if all the milestones need to be renegotiated. And I used to like freak out about having to tell clients that, and now I don't anymore. And most of them are just okay with it. Like, there are 1 or 2 that aren't, and then you have to decide how important the work is, the client, the job, the money, the blah, blah, blah. But by and large, they will understand that if they don't meet their deadlines, you cannot possibly be expected to meet yours. So Lisa, all I can say is that I hope you're better at this than I am. And here is where you have to be a hard ass and put in writing that because deadlines were not met in stage 1, there is a knock-on effect on stage 2 deadlines. And I hope that I get better at this over time as well. Jillian, you can't have fast, good, and cheap. I even have Jillian, I love this quote so much that I even have a little infographic that shows a Venn diagram and then the magic middle that no one can have. So I'll pop that in the freebies as well, and you can download that if you want. Lauren has a question. Let's have it, Lauren.
Hello. Last week, I was contacted by someone who wants to do something for a brand new business. They also don't quite know what they want, and I think that your questions will be very, very helpful going forward. But one of the things they also said was that they were very, very clear that they wanted me to be quite self-driven and self-sufficient and which I completely understand, that they want to pay someone to take this and do it all for them. That's what they're paying for. I get that. And I'm more than capable of driving my own machine. But how to know that you're driving in the right direction?
So you need to ask for a points person. So that if the client is going to, wants, so clients seem at the moment to want either high input work or low input work. High input work is when they have to do a lot with me, and low input is when they basically don't do anything. You can offer low input work to make clients' lives easier, absolutely. But there does have to be someone to guide you in the right direction. So yes, you're riding that horse and you have the reins and you're following your road, but at some point someone's going to have to say left here, And so what I would
Exactly.
ask, I would ask that they appoint a single point person who can direct you, and that you will obviously, you'll tell them that you won't take advantage of that. You'll only sort of call on that person as and when needed for navigational purposes. But also from an ask covering point of view, Lauren, you really do want someone to have oversight of what you're doing, because if you go too far in the wrong direction, then you're going to have scope creep and 4,000 debriefs, and they're going to say, oh, well, you know, SARS, not our problem. So try and ask for a points person that you can call on to sort of guide you if you need guidance.
And how often should you be looking at contacting that person? I mean, obviously it depends on how fast you're working, but is every couple of days, every day or two too much?
Yes.
Okay.
It depends on the size of the job, and it depends on the duration of the project. So I have a client that we've been working on this job for 3 years, and we have a meeting every 2 weeks. But if it's a much shorter timeline, so if it's like a 2-week job, then why don't you ask them? Like, say to them, how often is too often for you? And then go slightly less than whatever's too often for them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Good question. Anybody else? Am I going to go drink wine 10 minutes early? Is that basically what's happening? Whoever's laughing, I'm sure you've got a question. No? No questions? Even me, Robin's also going to drink wine. Kendall has a question. Thank God. Kendall, give me your question.
Hi, Tiffany. How are you?
I'm good. And you?
I'm good. I recently had a client. I also send a questionnaire for my web copywriting clients, and they gave very vague answers to the questions, and they gave a bunch of acronyms that I had to Google. And then their feedback to me was that I got all the acronyms wrong. That's not what those acronyms mean, and my copy is very vague. And I replied to them, well, this is the information that you gave me, but is there a way, because I feel like my questions are already very specific, but is there a way that I can make sure that they actually give me helpful answers? Like, for instance, one of my questions is, what is your target audience? Who do you want to respond to this? And they said, anyone who wants more optimization. And then they told me that my copy was vague because it was aimed at anyone who wants more optimization.
So now that you know this, and now that you've had the unpleasantness of this experience, what I would want you to do next time is, when you get their answers to the first submission of your questions and the answers are vague, go back in with the same questions, but in a different format. So either a virtual interview or a different sort of questionnaire. Go back in until you get what you need in order to do a decent job. Because otherwise you just guess and then you get it wrong, and then they tell you that it's not what they wanted. Also, be very wary of any client who says that their target audience is everyone, or everyone who insert vague thing here. Like, then you need to go back in and get more info, and maybe try a different person. So maybe try, like, whoever filled in the brief vaguely the first time, try someone else the second time. Say, I can tell that you're very busy, and you obviously things are hectic on your side. Is there anyone else that I can chat to about this or whatever? But I would go back in with a version 2 of the same questions so that this doesn't happen again.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Susan's hand is up. Go for it, Susan.
Yes, hi there. Thank you as always. Amazing, amazing, amazing. You make it just make so much sense. I'm stunned that I hadn't coordinated such specific questions. It's just amazing. So my question is, I've been collaborating on a big project with a number of different specialists. I'm not the project manager, which suits me fine because, you know, it's a really big project. It's my first time working on it, but and they've done a good job, but it feels, and here's the but, it feels like, because there's so many of us involved, trying to follow the procedure and make sure that emails are received and responded to has felt like we have to go over the same ground again and again. So for example, a certain set of pictures that was sent through and then sent through again, that I sent through, then had to send through again and then send through again, because somebody in the collaboration is like, I didn't see the pictures. And eventually I felt like there's one project coordinator and I'm not wanting to take that on, but I would love to know how I could have made that better or streamlined it in my head or something, because I really loved the project, but there were frustrations that I felt were maybe because I haven't worked with such a big team before. Does that make sense, or is that as vague as it feels in my head?
No, it makes complete sense.
Thank you.
I think that some measure of chaos will always come with projects and or teams of a particular size. So the minute something gets as big as this thing sounds, and there's so many moving parts and so many different players, and the project is enormous, and there's a project manager and that person's not you, then you do have to factor in ahead of time a fair bit of like chaos padding, and that's both from a time point of view and from a cost point of view. Because that is just the nature of projects like that. So what I want to happen in future is that when you feel yourself heading into a project that feels like this, a bell goes off in your mind that says, okay, I need chaos padding, and I need chaos padding to my time allocation and chaos padding to my bill, because there is going to be frustration. You are going to have to repeat stuff. Timelines are going to collapse and then expand, and the project may be shit, you know, and then you may have to deal with the fallout from that. So always add in chaos padding to projects that look like they're going to be mammoth.
Okay, that's really, really good advice. I think it felt like it should have been seamless, but maybe it just couldn't have been. It's really big, and it's over a period of like 3 months. It's going well, but exactly. It's going well, but it felt, it felt fraught on occasions, and I really liked the work. So I just wanted to make sure I hadn't left something unturned,
I don't think so. Nothing is seamless when the project is big. The bigger it is, the only seamless projects I've ever done in my whole career are small ones, or medium to large ones with teams that I've worked with before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. No problem.
Thank you.
Sure. Lisa, how do you know in advance how much processing or material review needs to be done? So either you get them to send you all that shit beforehand, before quoting, but that's maybe not going to happen for all sorts of reasons, not least of which is proprietary information. You may not have signed a contract or an NDA or an SLA, and they don't want to give you all their stuff. I usually make it a percentage of job size. So if it's a little baby one, like a 10 grander, I usually add in like 1,500 to 2 grand material review time. If it's a like 100 grander, then there's normally 12 to 15 grand's worth of material review time. That's sort of my thumbsucky way of doing it, just to cover me, because you don't know how long the piece of string is. Yeah, Robin, it's probably close to like 12 to 15% ish, more than 10. Yeah, I'd say 12 to 15% is probably safe of the size of the job. And those of you who've been on my rate setting webinar will know that I also advise you to add in admin time. And so if you're doing material review, you can make that and your admin time one line item. So I always add in admin time as well. And it's packaged in with the material review. So one of the line items on my quote will say info gathering, material review, client interviewing, and client liaison. And that's all my like chasing and fighting for money and all that shit. Right, we have 4 minutes to go. Any questions? Gareth.
Tiffany, hi. Thanks, it's been interesting. I wanted to just figure out, how do you cut out all the time wasters? Because I get a lot of approaches from people who will approach me and ask for a quick chat, which I feel like has to happen before this question or the brief side of things. But you end up going on a 30 or 45-minute chat with a person discussing all kinds of aspects related to strategic communication, and then the person just disappears. You know, the lead normally just goes cold. Is that something one should avoid doing, or is it just part of the lead generation process?
Look, I think that a first chat is very much a hygiene factor, but I do try and eliminate tire kickers. And I'll tell you how I do that. So I'm on the expensive side of copywriters in South Africa. It just is what it is. That's, you know, there's no point hiding from that. And so there are often people who will find me, but not know that up front. So they won't have come to me via word of mouth. They will have come like through my website maybe, or LinkedIn often. And then I'll get this, hello, can we have a chat? And I don't really engage with the chat question. I send back an email that says, thanks so much for reaching out. I'd love to help you with your insert project here. I've attached my bio and my rate card for your records. And below are a couple of questions that will really help me to understand what it is that you're looking for. What I find that does, the rate card shows them my hourly rate. So if they are looking for a 350 Rand an hour copywriter, they know that I'm not that person. And then there's no more wasting each other's time. So it scares off the tire kickers. They may answer the questions. They may not. And then I will decide on a case-by-case basis whether I'm going to indulge the request for a 30-minute meet and greet. Very seldom will I do like longer than half an hour before I've scoped a job. So I'll do 30 minutes if they really want one, obviously for free. And then if they choose to use me, fantastic. And if they don't, that's fine as well. And I'll go balls to the wall in the 30 minutes. I'll give advice and I'll I give them the best that I can in 30 minutes for free. But then it's now time either to give me some money or we part ways. And by then they will have seen my rate card, so they'll know what they're in for. I don't know, Gareth, if that helps.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thanks. I was just worried that I do what you do. I sort of lay it all out there for them, but I don't think I do that pre-preparation that you do to sort of set their minds into the space of what's about to happen after.
Yeah, I find it's always better just to let them know what they're in for price-wise. Otherwise, sometimes it's just not worth going down the road. Like, I'm never going to be a 350 Rand an hour copywriter. So if that's what you're looking for, there are millions of them out there. Go find one.